Your Excellency, thank you so much for joining CNBC. I want to kick off by asking you to walk me through how Egypt as a government is planning to deal with the economic fallout of coronavirus.
Hi, Hadley, and thank you for this interview. Well, the government of Egypt has put together a response and rebuild strategy. And in that strategy, we are working on flattening both the health curve as well as the recession curve. So we go out to protect the citizens, where there has been a lot done with respect to infield hospitals, several issues related to testing and so on. And then with respect to the recession curve, we're really pushing forward with many of the structural reforms that we wanted to do anyway, but it's coming in a very expedited fashion related to social safety nets, widening those to people who are vulnerable. Also through financial inclusion, there has been a focus on the unorganized and informal labor. The central bank and the Ministry of Finance have actually pushed also stimulus in a very coordinated fashion, whether through reduction in interest rates or alleviating some of the actually delaying tax payments on several firms, also allowing for lower interest rates for different credit facilities for SMEs and for different industries. And of course, the tourism industry is one of the industries that gets some of the biggest stimulus. So there has been a host of factors and a host of policies that have been taking place.
So several years now of economic reforms, tough reforms, frankly, that President Sisi was able to push through in spite of some opposition. I mean, you still got a situation where you've got 1 in 3 people below the poverty line in Egypt. At the same point, this was supposed to be a good year of economic growth. And frankly, the IMF has said, in spite of COVID-19, Egypt will still grow.
Well, it's very good that you mentioned the economic reforms. We embarked on a very ambitious reform program with the IMF in 2016. It concluded in the summer of 2019. And we entered this crisis with fiscal buffers as well as foreign reserve buffers, which helped weather the first shock. So if it weren't for those comprehensive reforms on the tax side, on the budget, on foreign exchange and so forth, the situation would have been quite even more difficult. And you're right, we have been growing at around 5%. And the IMF came out with its report saying that we are going to be standing out in the region with a growth rate in 2020 of around 2%, and then the following year above that. So we do give a good story when it comes to growth. It's a diversified economy. Unlike other countries, there was not a full lockdown, but there was mindfulness when it came to curfews and so forth.
In terms of what happens next, obviously a big portion of your GDP has in the past relied on tourism. You're a former minister of tourism for Egypt. Obviously, the new realities of COVID-19 are really going to change the game for that industry globally. How is the Egyptian government looking to diversify in the coming years as a result of this? Because it's really just anybody's guess at this point how bad it's really going to be.
Yes, well, it's a few things just to keep in mind. I mean, no country is by itself in this crisis. All of us have common problems, and the solutions are always going to be global. So that's one thing at the outset. When you look at tourism and aviation, as you mentioned, these are the two hardly hit industries globally. In the case of Egypt, tourism plays a big role, not just in terms of GDP, but also in terms of employment. And just yesterday, there was a very important announcement by the PM and the Ministers of Health and Tourism and Aviation that they are opening up domestic travel towards June, taking into account the precautionary policies related to health and sanitation and so forth. But the crisis has, like any other crisis, there will be winners and losers. As much as some sectors are going to see a drastic fall, there are others which are booming, whether it's digital and technology-based industries, whether it's agriculture and food processing. There are other sectors that are really showing an increase in terms of demand or appetite. And I think for every government in the world, what you are trying to do is actually provide the opportunities or provide the ground for those particular sectors to boom, and at the same time try and mitigate the impact or the fallout from those that are severely affected.
For international investors, I mean, at the end of the day, we're still looking to find a way to create revenue, to find growth. In terms of what is happening today in Egypt, obviously international cooperation minister, where do you see sectors that international investors could look to in Egypt?
Yeah, well, as a Minister of International Cooperation, the idea is to try and create a platform for multilateral and bilateral development partners to come together and actually contribute to Egypt's development story. And that's something that has been happening in the past. And now, with the crisis, some of the vocabulary that is becoming very much in any household: solidarity, coordination, collaboration, multilateralism. So all of these are now important vocabulary which is used, not only lip service, but actually put in action. So with our development partners, we have done several PPP projects in the past. I take one of them being the Dimban project for renewable solar energy in Aswan. And what we expect going forward is to see more of those projects. Egypt is a very big country. You have 100 million population, and there will continue to be demand. There will continue to be labor, which is skilled to be able to provide for investments in different sectors. What we are also doing as a government, and this is something that has been announced, is a second wave of reforms which focuses on removing the bottlenecks when it comes to private investments, so making the doing business easier through legislative reforms, through different policies related to customs, etc. And so this is something that is going to be also announced and expedited in the period ahead. So definitely, with our international partners, development partners, as well as with the private sector, that is where we see the way forward.
So the message is to international investors that Egypt is very much open for business.
Absolutely, we're open for business. We want to, we've had success stories in the past, and on April 2nd, I launched a platform with our, development partners, both multilateral and bilateral, and we're coming up with a new global partnership narrative. It's called PNP, PPP, which is not public-private partnership, but it's actually people, projects, and purpose. And we want to make sure that this crisis does not derail us from thinking about the sustainable development goals that all of us want to achieve, whether they are related to sustainable cities, better environment, gender equality, etc. And that can only be fulfilled not just through government policy, but also through a very active private sector, as well as very mindful and cooperative multilateral institutions. And that's how we see the way forward.
And in terms of what happens next regionally, obviously lower oil prices, not great for GCC economies. Are you worried about what the region looks like given the impact of COVID-19? Well,
this is a crisis which we have not seen before globally. We witnessed the global financial crisis. We've read about the global depression. This is a crisis which is called the Great Lockdown. And many of its dimensions are yet to be unraveled. And there's a very overwhelming sense of humility when it comes to policymakers, private sector, etc. So it's a challenging time. I think countries are going to be adaptive and innovative in the way they deal with it. I talk about that. I talk about this as Egypt, but also as our, for our friends in the Gulf. So I think it's going to evolve in a certain way, but I believe that every country is doing its best with its given policies to try and mitigate the implications of whether it's oil, whether it's sluggish demand, whether it's the supply value chains, global value chains. So all of these are topics that require a lot of dialogue, and that's why multilateral settings are quite important.
Do you think that we're going to see a shift in the balance of regional power as a result of this?
I think everyone right now is focused on making sure that, or the very immediate question for every government is the proper trade-off between opening up for the economy and livelihood, but at the same time being careful because of people's lives. So I think that is the key overwhelming question, and nobody has the silver bullet or the right answer. There's going to be a lot of learning. There's going to be a lot of I think successes, some mistakes, and I think that's what everyone now, when you read and see what colleagues in different governments are doing. So I think that's really the focus.
And in terms of your greatest concern going forward, obviously we've seen a lot of noise coming from both European governments as well as the United States with regards to the need for an inquiry into the origins of the coronavirus and whether China was as honest as they should have been. Obviously, Egypt has been opening up to Eastern investment for several years now. Do you feel concerned at all about the way that conversation is headed?
I think there are a lot of different questions. I don't think, as I mentioned, I think the focus right now for governments is this trade-off between trying to balance the health and the economy, because that is really what is going to be important for our populations. We have a big population. We want to make sure that we are able to move ahead, maintain a growth that creates the jobs, as well as push forward with our reforms. In the past, Egypt has been open for investments both from the West and from the East. Nobody has been at all either excluded or given preferential treatment. We have many projects which are available for all types of investors, and that is a message that we will keep on pushing.
Do you see that your investor demographics could change as a result of this, as each country and frankly spheres of influence look inward to sort of rehabilitate their economies?
That's a real challenge for everyone. I mean, one thing that stands out also from this crisis is this debate about whether economies are coupled or not. We have seen and witnessed very much that they are coupled, that there are complementarities, and that when one country has a problem with its supply, everybody is affected. So yes, this does create more, I would say, trying to be more risk averse by having more dependence on domestic chains of production. But this sometimes takes time, depends on the industries. You also need a number of industries to be clustered together to be able to do that. So there will be some time until that is completely taking over from the global supply chain. So there are so many questions, Hadley, and little answers. But what this is doing to all of us, it's creating more imagination, it's creating more innovation, and definitely more needed coordination between different players, both globally and regionally.
Your Excellency, thank you so much for taking the time to join CNBC.
Thank you very much, Hadley. Thank you. Stay safe.